It was 7:53 in the morning on April 22, 2016, when the police in Pike County, located in southern Ohio, United States, received a shocking call. On the other end of the line, a woman's broken voice could be heard saying that there was blood everywhere. She was breathing hard and couldn't give any more information. Finally, she was able to explain what had happened. She said she had found her brother-in-law and her cousin seriously injured. Officers responded to 4077 Union Hill Road. As they arrived at the house, a neighbor asked them to stop. He wanted to give them 2 more addresses of relatives of the victims. Something in his heart told him that they had also been attacked. At the same time, they found 2 more people in another family home. The bodies began to pile up. By the time they visited the 3 trailer homes, the death toll was 7 people. They had all been shot in the head while they were sleeping. As if that were not enough, around noon, more news reached them. Another member of the same family had been found dead. The only survivors were a 3-year-old child, a 6-month-old baby, and another who was only 4 days old. Little Sophie, who happened to be with her father, was also still alive, as if she had known she needed to be protected that night. The Rhodens were a large family from Ohio, United States. The patriarch, Christopher Rhoden, had been married to Dana Manley Rhoden, and together they had 3 children, Frankie, Hannah Mae, and Christopher Jr. By 2016, Christopher and Dana were already separated, but resided on the same land located on Union Hill Road in rural Pike County, Ohio, which they owned. The 40-year-old man worked as a laborer at the Big Bear Lake family complex and lived in a trailer with his 38-year-old cousin Gary. The man, who had a son, stayed in the same field. Dana was 37 at the time and worked as a nursing assistant at a rehabilitation center for kids. She lived in a trailer located 2 kilometers from her ex-husband with her minor children, who were 19 and 16 years old at the time. Hannah's 2-year-old daughter Sophie also spent most of her time with them. Sometime later, Frankie, who was already 20 years old, had moved with his fiancée Hannah Hazel Gilly to another trailer that was also very close. He had a 3-year-old son called Bentley from a previous relationship and a 6-month-old baby with his new partner. He spent most of his time helping his father at the complex. The family was completed by Kenneth, Christopher's brother, as well as the rest of his loved ones. Kenneth was known for being a very hard-working man who traveled to Columbus every day for his job. His home was just 15 minutes from the rest of his relatives. On April 18, 2016, the Rhoden family expanded with the arrival of Hannah's new daughter, whose father was unknown. Although there was speculation that she could be the daughter of Charlie, her sister-in-law's brother, there was no certainty. The young woman had no interest in finding this out, since she did not have a good relationship with Jake Wagner, Sophie's father. Dana planned to raise the 2 little girls while working as a nursing assistant and finishing high school. The relationship between the Rhodens was so good that they even included Bobby Jo Manley, Dana's sister. Since she was unemployed, Christopher offered her a job taking care of his animals, since the field where she lived was very large. Bobby agreed, not knowing that during one of those visits she would encounter the most unimaginable scene possible. The Rhoden family was meeting with Dana's sister and Sophie's daughter. It was 7:53 a.m. on April 22, 2016. Bobby entered the trailer just as she did every day. She quickly noticed that the house was not empty. Inside, Christopher and Gary lay in the middle of a gigantic pool of blood. She immediately took his cell phone and dialed the emergency number. With a broken voice, she asked them to go to 4077 Union Hill Street. Bobby stayed in the house. Then, as if by reflex, Bobby headed to her other relative's home. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. A few seconds later, little Bentley came out. Alarmed, Bobby entered the house. What she saw took her breath away. On the bed were the inert bodies of Frank and his wife. Next to them, alive but splattered with blood, was the little 6-month-old baby. While the police were heading to the scene, another neighbor intercepted them. He asked them to go to 2 other nearby places because there would surely be more deaths. They were right. In the 3rd home, they found the bodies of Dana, Christopher Jr. and Hannah. They were also covered in blood. The only survivor from that home was the little girl who was only a few days old. By then, the news had spread like wildfire. In the media, Donald Stone, a cousin of the Rhodens, went to make sure Kenneth was safe. Sadly, he had also received a gunshot wound. He called the police to report that he had found the last body. At 1:26 p.m., all the victims were already accounted for. There were 8: Christopher, Dana, Frankie, Hannah Gilly, Christopher Jr., Hannah May, Kenneth, and Gary. The only survivors were the small children, whom the killers had left safe. Little Sophie was also still alive, as she happened to be at her father Rhoden's house. By inspecting the bodies, investigators were able to carry out a reconstruction of the crime. Christopher had a defensive wound on his right arm, leading them to conclude that he was awake when the murderers entered his home. He confronted the attackers but was riddled with 9 bullets. Gary, for his part, was shot 5 times. Dana received the same number of shots to her head and neck. Some were executed even after they had already perished, implying that the perpetrators had been especially cruel to her. Christopher Jr. was hit 4 times in the head while he slept, as was Frankie. Hannah was also murdered with 2 bullets in the skull. Kenneth was the only one with just 1 shot. All the victims had died due to repeated detonations, carried out from a short distance in the same part of the body. Detectives estimated that the killers fired a total of 32 times. A silencer had been used, as no one in the area had heard the noises. In addition, the murderers were covered with plastic bags and had several bruises. The autopsy revealed that at least one of the victims had 9 significant injuries. It was evident that this was a planned crime to eliminate the entire clan. What they did not imagine was who could have carried out such a sinister act. When searching the home, the agents found 5 different types of Remington brand casings. However, they did not encounter any type of murder weapon. They also found another unused bullet, belonging to another model. This confirmed their suspicion that more than one attacker had been involved in the crime. Although the blood of the victims was present in all the trailers, none of it yielded the DNA of the perpetrators. Detectives attempted to search the home's security cameras, but they had been disconnected. These devices also did not contain any DNA. It was clear that those who planned the crime did so very carefully. Just when they were running out of hope, the agents found something. In 3 of the 4 homes there were marijuana crops. In one of them, there were more than 200 plants. They quickly theorized that the Rhodens were involved in selling drugs, as it was common in Ohio. The motive for the crime had probably been a settling of scores. They investigated whether the family had connections to cartels or drug traffickers, but found nothing. They considered the possibility of a family dispute over money from drug sales, but this also went nowhere. They also observed cages with fighting cocks in one of the 4 trailers. However, illegal cockfighting did not appear to be the reason for the incident. They were about to withdraw, having discovered nothing until a key testimony appeared. Leonard Manley, Dana's father, assured detectives that the killers had to be known to the family, otherwise the dogs would have attacked them. This, coupled with the fact that there were no signs of forced entry in any of the houses, limited the lines of investigation. Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine said it was a cold-blooded crime and that the killers were still loose and armed. They tried to get the rest of the Rhoden relatives to safety. 30 investigators traveled across the state and combed every road and home. They also questioned every acquaintance of the family to try to find out something about what happened. This alone caused a wave of panic in Pike County. The uncertainty was so great that a businessman named Jeff Ruby offered a sum of $25,000 to anyone who offered a clue that would help the police. Neighbors hung a sign on Christopher's barn door that read, "Do you know who murdered us on April 22, 2016? In January 2017, there was a first result from the investigation, but it was only a side effect. A cousin of the Rhodens, named Josh, was arrested for drug trafficking. However, police had already determined that the amount of marijuana the Rhodens had grown was not significant enough to suggest a cartel attack. Months passed, and the agents could not even find a motive. After interrogating 550 people, collecting 1,100 clues, and examining 700 pieces of evidence, on April 13, 2017, the authorities had to deliver harsh news. They announced in the media that they did not have enough evidence to make any arrests. However, prosecutor Rob Young assured that they could not yet make it public. Days later, it was 1 year since the incident. A mass and a small tribute were organized, attended by all kinds of authorities. The Pike Massacre was still on everyone's lips. But by the time 2 years had passed, only the neighbors remained interested in the case. Neither the local press, the sheriff, nor the prosecutor showed up at the second mass. The largest criminal investigation in the county's history was nearly forgotten. In June, a very important notice arrived. The prosecutor's words proved true. For the first time, he informed the public that he had his sights on the Wagners, the family to which Hannah's ex-partner belonged. The names mentioned were George Wagner III, his wife Angela Wagner, both 47, and their 2 children, and Edward Rhoden Wagner, 26. They all lived in Pives, 25 kilometers from where the incident occurred. The problem was that by then the Wagners had moved to Kenai, a small town in Alaska. They had taken little Sophie with them, who was left in the custody of her father. After Hannah's death, their excuse for leaving the state was that they loved Hannah's family so much. However, they didn't realize that Hannah's family, the Rhodens, were devastated by her death. Rob asked the public for any information about the Wagners, but they didn't have to wait long to see them again. The Wagners soon ran out of money and had to return to live in South Webster, Ohio. While preparing to arrest them, the agents discovered how the relationship between the 2 families had ended in a trail of blood. Jake Wagner met Hannah Rhoden, one of his first friends. He was 18 years old and she was just 13. They went to prom together, and since then, they had become inseparable. This also united the 2 families, who began to share gatherings and parties. When Hannah was 15, she became pregnant with their daughter, Sophia. Shortly after Sophia's birth, Jake asked Hannah to move in with him and his family. He believed that this way, the girl would grow up in a healthier environment. Hannah did not accept, as she felt this was an attempt to keep her under his control. From then on, everything went downhill. Both wanted full custody of the girl, and each family was fighting for their interests. On one occasion, Jake even suggested that Hannah sign a document to share custody with him and his brother. Seeing that Hannah did not agree to his request, Jake began to threaten her. He texted her that if necessary, he would take Sophia away by force. He also tried to manipulate her, telling her that if she truly loved her daughter, she would know she had to live with him. According to these same emails, Jake thought that the Rhodens could hurt the little girl. These conversations continued for 2 years. Hannah continued to refuse to live with the Wagners. In March 2015, she decided to end her relationship with Rhoden because he was very abusive. In one of the messages she sent him, she made it clear that she did not want to live with him. She also stated that he had hurt her and that she was tired of him chasing her. Such violent practices were common in the Wagner family, as George IV had obtained full custody of his son by threatening the mother with weapons. Everything got worse when Hannah announced that she was expecting a second child. Although she denied that Rhoden was the father, he was not entirely sure, as they had had sex again. Instead of respecting his ex-partner's wishes, he started a new dispute over paternity. In December 2015, Angela Wagner hacked into Hannah's social media and discovered something that completely enraged the family. In a Facebook message, Hannah told George IV's former mother-in-law that her ex-partner's family would have to kill her before she would give up custody of her daughter. A few weeks before the incident, the Wagners tried one last time to convince Hannah to give Rhoden full custody of Sophie, but Hannah refused again. That's when Rita Newcomb, Rhoden's maternal grandmother, forged a document to make this happen. In the middle of the legal process, George III and Christopher had a major dispute over where their granddaughter would live. The relationship between both families was already completely broken. That's when the Wagners began planning the crime. On Christmas 2016, they held a vote to decide if they would murder the Rhoden family. To keep custody of Sophie, everyone agreed. For 8 months, they dedicated themselves to planning the massacre. They thoroughly studied the Rhodens' routine, their schedules, what time they slept, and what their houses were like. Additionally, they investigated their surveillance devices. They even went to the field where the Rhodens lived to shoot into the air and check if the noise of the gunshots would carry too far. Noticing that the sound would expose them, George III decided that it was best to buy parts to make homemade silencers. Angela, for her part, purchased sneakers for her husband and children to wear on the day of the crime and later destroyed them. She also obtained phone jammers to prevent the victims from calling for help. George III arranged to get a truck to use that night without anyone recognizing them. The night of the incident, Angela stayed at home with Sophia since it was their day for joint custody. This provided them with a perfect alibi. George III, for his part, went to Christopher's house to convince him to enter into an alleged drug deal. Christopher accepted and opened the door to his home, not knowing what would come next. Authorities were able to find evidence that Angela had purchased the sneakers a few weeks before the murder. They coincided with the imprint of a blood-stained sole that was left on the floor of one of the trailers. They were also able to verify that he hacked his ex-daughter-in-law's account. While searching the Wagners' electronic devices, agents found internet searches about parental custody. There was a clear obsession with controlling the children. However, there also seemed to be a conflict between the two families over $3,000 regarding the purchase of a car. Although the mastermind of the plan had been Angela, the agents were certain that the executions were led by Rhoden and that all members of the Wagner family participated. On November 13, 2018, the investigation stalled. As of November 12, 2018, authorities announced the arrest of 6 people. The first 4 were George III, Angela, George IV, and Rhoden. They were indicted by the Pike County grand jury on 22 counts, including 8 counts of aggravated murder. They pleaded not guilty to all charges. Rhoden was also charged with an intimate crime for sleeping with Hannah when she was 15 years old, and he was 20. That same day, they arrested 2 people who, although they had not participated in the incident, were accused of perjury and obstruction of justice. They were Angela's mother, Rita Newcomb, 65, and George III's mother, Frederica Wagner, 76. The charges against the latter included lying about some bulletproof vests she had bought for her son. Neither was sent to prison, but Frederica was fitted with a GPS to electronically monitor her movements. In addition, the authorities took the opportunity to make public the motive for the crime. In the fight for Sophia's custody, after years of uncertainty, the only thing left to do was wait for the trial. In June 2019, it was shown through receipts that Frederica had purchased the bulletproof vests after the event. The state dropped the charges against her. Rita did not have the same luck. That same year, she underwent a handwriting analysis that determined she was guilty of falsifying a document for Sophia's custody. In December, the woman began cooperating with the prosecutor's office to avoid going to prison. The rest of the Wagners remained behind bars, refusing to cooperate with the case. They even said they felt very sorry for the death of the Rhodens and expressed their desire to see the alleged real murderers in prison. It seemed like the case would never be closed, and Ohioans would never be able to sleep in peace again. After 2 years, something unexpected happened. On April 22, 2021, just on the 5th anniversary of the massacre, Rhoden reached a deal with prosecutors. The condition was that his relatives could not receive capital punishment, but rather life imprisonment. He confessed to the murders, but he couldn't implicate the others. The moment Rhoden pleaded guilty, he was taken into custody. Rhoden personally killed 5 of the 8 victims and pleaded guilty to 23 criminal charges. 8 of them were for aggravated murder, the rest for conspiracy, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and illegal intimate conduct with a minor. He testified that he felt he had to take Hannah's life to gain custody of his daughter by taking her life. He had to do the same with the rest of the Rhodens, since he knew that if he didn't, they would seek revenge. However, he expressed his deep feelings for the Rhodens. Rhoden stayed in jail, but he couldn't repent. He was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. After the trial, he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in the cases against his parents and brother. Thanks to their cooperation, they found the truck that George III had purchased specifically for the operation, as well as 3 firearms that the family had tried to cut into pieces to incinerate. These items were buried in buckets with seeds and hidden behind the pond at the Wagner residence. A specialist managed to reconstruct the fragments to verify that the casings matched those found in the Rhoden homes. On September 10th of that year, Angela pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated murder, robbery, and tampering with evidence. She agreed to testify against the remaining defendants. In exchange, prosecutors dropped the aggravated murder charges against her. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. All that remained was to judge those who continued to deny their participation. On August 28, 2022, the trial against George Wagner IV began. Special Prosecutor Angela Wagner called the defendant's ex-partner, who had distanced himself from the family because he feared for his life, to testify. The prosecution continued to allege that George was complicit in the planning, execution, and cover-up of the murders. However, he denied having any knowledge of the crimes before, during, or after they occurred. He even stated that if his family had asked him to participate in something like that, he would never have agreed. After 3 months, George IV was found guilty of all 22 charges, including 8 counts of aggravated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for these charges, and he received an additional 121-year consecutive sentence for carrying firearms. George III is still awaiting his trial, which is scheduled for February 2024. If he is found guilty of the same 22 charges as his son, he will face the same fate. Even though the entire family has been convicted, George III continues to maintain his innocence. The surviving children were left in the care of distant relatives. Out of respect for their privacy, their whereabouts cannot be revealed, but it is known that they are happy and safe. When asked about his father, Bentley responds that he is fixing cars in heaven with Jesus. The Wagners' goal was to keep custody of Sophie. They swore that they would take better care of her, but in reality, they stripped her of her mother, her uncles, and her grandparents. The hope now is that she grows up away from her family's influence, George IV was found guilty of all 22 charges, and he grew up in an environment where violence was never seen as a means of resolution.